Hello guys, this is Complexity Show. Today I'm gonna do a deck tech video from a mage I created. Um, it is something I've been working on for a while. Um, the first batch of the list looked very different to this, or not very different, but the idea looked the same, but there was a lot of card differences. I know that Tides of Time, another great player, has been working on this as well, and he actually inspired me to use Undertaker in this list, and that was what made the deck much stronger than it used to be. I used to run Mana Worm instead as a 1-drop, no zombie shows, and the list was pretty weak to faster decks because you could only get you could easily get gotten rushed down if you didn't draw the mana worm. But with this deck we have 6 1-drops, and um, that's the way you fight against Sue and Hunter. You just have to fight um, creature for creature, because you don't really have too much spells. And we took out the Frostbolt as well. I used to run Frostbolt. So we don't have any spells whatsoever except Duplicate, Mirror Entity, and Echo Medivh in this list. So it has a lot of creatures. The idea behind this deck is that you have basically flood the board. When you have board control, to play around the AoE, you play Echo Medivh. So the deck functions around this card. So put a copy of each friendly minion into your hand, and you just get usually you get like 3 and upwards targets with this, and if you can get 3 cards with this, it is worth it. So always don't be too greedy with this. Like if you can get 3 cards, take it. uh, it also depends on what you play against, like, and what creatures you have. Usually, like if you have BJH against control decks like Handlock Warrior and other like big decks that runs a lot of BJH targets, you wanna Echo Medivh that. But against like mid-range decks like Druids, like let's say you have a Loot Hoarder, you have a Haunted Creeper, and maybe Argus, it's totally fine to take 3 cards with it if you don't have another play. Um, uh, so the curve is very low here, as you can see. We curve out at Dr. Boom. But since we have, like, basically, a lot of times you have, like, a full board with this deck. And if you have a full board of smaller creatures, that makes up to a very strong board compared to, like, let's say just one giant or something like this. It's actually better to have a full board than a single creature, because a single creature can easily get removed, while a lot of smaller stuff is harder to deal with. You have to have AoE. What can be the problem with this deck is that it's kind of like a miracle that if you don't draw Echo Medivh, you can run out of stuff. But when you draw this, you usually just refill your hand. Okay, let's go through the each card for card here. Clockwork Gnome. We basically just have this to buff the Undertaker, so we can fight back against Sue. Like, if you don't have this card, and let's say you have coin, your opponent starts with an Undertaker, and you have an Undertaker in your hand, but no follow-up Death Rattle except a 2-drop. you can't really play an Undertaker into an Undertaker then. So you just fall behind too much if you can't do that, because it's so risky to just play a naked Undertaker turn 1 when you have the coin and your opponent started with an Undertaker, because it's just gonna die, most likely, because the likelihood for them to have a death rattle is so high. But the Clockwork Gnome doesn't synergize too well with this. I know Tides of Time runs Antonidas in his deck, so he can actually use the spare part later on, while this deck can't really. But I do think Antonidas is a bit slow for this deck, and one spare part is not really enough to activate Antonidas. If you want to run Antonidas, you could add like Mechanical Yeti as well, and that way you have 4 creatures that gives you spare parts. But spare part can also be useful, like you can get a taunt, you can get a cloaking field, you can get a time renewal. It's always like much better than, let's say, having a Leponome that deals 2 damage instead. So I think the spare part is better than, like, let's say, playing a Leponome. I do think you need a Death Rattle 1-drop though. There's not really much other 1 mana Death Rattle. We can check here what there is. Let's type here. So these are the options you have, and it's only Leponome that we can have instead of this. So I think Clockwork Gnome is just functions better than Leponome in this deck, because you don't really rush them down as fast as possible. What you do is you get a big board and you play Echo Medivh, and that usually seals the deal with this deck. So Undertaker, this card is just amazing. As you can see, we have 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, plus the boom. The boom bots actually buffs the Undertaker twice. That is such a strong combo together with it. So we have 14 Death Rattle cards to combo the Undertaker with. Usually this card is like a big bomb in this deck. I had many games where my Undertaker is actually like a 9-10 or something like this. So this card is actually the bomb in this deck, one of the bombs in this deck. And also it can be used early game to get board control fast, which is the primary goal you need to do in the early game. Zombie Chow is just one of the strongest 1-drops you can have. It doesn't have to have other, like Undertaker, it doesn't have to have other Death Rattle cards to function by its own. It's just 2/3 for 1 mana, so it cheats the curve by 1. So you get the upper hand directly when you play it on turn 1. The heal on your opponent doesn't really matter. You just fight for the board early game and try to get as strong board as possible until you can play an Echo Medivh. Hunted Creeper we have 1 of. I took out 1. It's generally a strong Death Rattle card, and you want sticky minions in this deck because it's a bit weak to AoE. So this gives us a bit of AoE protection, and it has Death Rattle. By itself, it's like if you can trade for it over like 2 or 3 turns, it's actually a 2 mana 3/4, which is pretty strong in itself. The only downside to this that we don't have cards like Savage Roar, Flame Tank Totem to like utilize the Spectral Spider so well. We do have 1 Argus though, but the only 1 Argus is not really usually enough. Ironbeak Owl I added. It's always nice to have 1 silence in your deck, and you can Echo Medivh it. You can play the silence, and if you want to have another silence in your hand, you just Echo Medivh it. Play it, silence something, Echo Medivh, and you have another silence at your disposal. Loot Hoarder, it's a Death Rattle, and it cycles itself, so it gives us a higher chance to get the Echo Medivh when we need it. I think this is mandatory, and it buffs the Undertaker. Usually with Undertaker you want death rattle cards that are 1 mana costed or 2 mana costed, so you can snowball it very fast and get the upper hand on the board early on. Mad Scientist, this card is just a bit broken in Mage in my opinion. It basically is a 2 mana for a 2/2, which is pretty weak in itself, but it fetches you into play secret, which every secret in Mage costs 3. So it's basically should be a 4 mana to 5 mana costed creature. Because it fetches you a 3 mana spell into play right away for 2 mana. So it cheats the curve. We have 1 duplicate. It's basically just to refill your hand. We could add another duplicate, but I don't think it's sometimes hard to like get a good duplicate. You don't really want to duplicate the Clockwork Gnome. So if you get that, it's not that strong, to be honest. So I think 1 is fine. And you want 3 secrets. That's the perfect number. Just so you can utilize the Mad Scientist at its best. Because sometimes you have a Mad Scientist in hand in play, and a Mirian entity in play. And if the Mad Scientist dies, then you don't get any secrets from it. So you need to have 3. This could be changed to other secrets to your likings, but I do like 1 duplicate. Mirror entity, this is the best one. It allows us, like, this is MVP against certain decks like Druid. Because Druid nowadays usually just run the only low costed or best way for them to proc Mirror entity is Keeper of the Grove. And if you can time it right, let's say on turn 5 or turn 6 where they really want to play a big creature, they are forced to play Keeper of the Grove to play around Mirror Entity, and that's basically weak, cripples their turn a lot. Even if they Keeper, you're happy about that, because it cripples them so much because they didn't play their turn efficiently. And you get a 2/4 for 3 mana, which is okay. This card is so good if you can time it right. It is a bit problematic sometimes to know when to play it though. And sometimes you just get it randomly from Mad Scientist. It is weak though to decks like Zoo, because the Zoo has and the Hunter, because they have a lot of 1-drops in their deck. It is weak. Mirror Entity is usually weak against decks that have low curve, but very strong against high curve decks. I think this is the best secret right now. Like Counterspell lost a lot of value, because there's a lot of spare parts right now. So you could just proc the Counterspell with spare parts now, and then you basically don't get any value whatsoever from your Counterspell. The other secrets are like Heal for 8, Ice Block. Ice Block doesn't really synergize well with this deck, because we are usually the one in control of the game. So 2 big game hunters, it's because we need 2 big game hunters to fight back against control decks. Like against Warrior, if you have 2 BJHs and you can copy 1, basically they have no big threats anymore. And they have to spend, let's say, 8 mana for a Ragnaros. That's it, their whole turn. And you spend 3 mana, so you get away so much with that in tempo that it's just gonna win you the game. And then you can Echo Medivh this, you can even duplicate it sometimes and follow up their other big threats. If you know they have BDHR, you'd never play this just natively, unless you know what they're gonna play next turn and you wanna follow up with the Echo Medivh. Then you can just play it for a 3 mana 4/2 body. I added one counter Mage because sometimes you have secrets in your hand which you don't want to have. You usually want to fetch the secrets with Mad Scientist, and this allows you to cheat the curve a bit. So you can have a mirror entity in your hand and a counter Mage, and you basically play a 3 mana 4/3, which is kind of weak in itself, but if you can get a free mirror entity, it's actually 6 mana used, right? That would cost 6 mana in without this card. So it's basically an innervate for 3 mana done, which is very strong. This is Ecomotive. This is the primary card in this deck. It allows us to refill our hand when we need to, and usually this is the game sealer with this deck. This card is what seals the game usually. We don't have any bursts or anything, so we are not trying to kill them as fast as possible. What we are trying to do is just out card them. And when you do this on like four minions, you usually just win. Unless you're in a tough spot and you can't play all your stuff. But if you can play all your stuff after you played Ecomotive for four creatures, you usually just win. Defender of Argus is just a nice way to utilize your board control well, because you're usually in the one with control of the board, and if you can Argus 2 minions at the same time, it is a lot of value in itself, and it also protects us against the faster decks, which can be a problem sometimes, like Hunter and Soup. So they have to go through your creatures instead of just going directly to your life pool. Piloted Shredder, this is probably the best 4-drop we can play because it's so hard to deal with, and it gives us AoE protection. With the problem with this deck is that AoE just crushes this deck sometimes. Like if they can AoE you just before you wanna play Ecomotive, it's usually game over for you. But if you get something at least after the AoE from the Death Rattle, you can still stabilize and get at least 3 cards from your Ecomotive. Water Elemental, this is the new addition. I wanted a bit of a higher curve, and this is a hard creature to deal with. Usually the way you play against this deck is that you wanna clear the board as much as possible for your opponent. Your opponent wants to clear your creatures as much as possible, so you don't get the value Ecomotive. And if you attack into this guy, his creature will be frozen for 3 turns. And this guy is very hard to deal with because of its high toughness, high life pool. 6 toughness is very hard to deal with. So I think this is one of the stronger creatures we can have. Lofeb is this card is a must, I think. What you can do with this card is that, let's say you have 2 creatures on board, and you want to save your creatures, right? You want to save them from removal. So what you do is you just play this to follow up with the Ecomotive next turn. That is one of the ways that I usually win a lot of games. Let's say I have a Undertaker and I have a PGH on board. I want to save them from removal, which I know my opponent has. I just play Lofeb, which means that he can only remove 1 of my creatures with removal. He won't be able to develop anything on the board. And if he does that, it costs him the whole turn, right? And I can still follow up with Ecomotive. One of the things you can do with Ecomotive is you don't necessarily need 3 creatures to echo medivh with it. If you have good targets with echo medivh, let's say you have a sludge and you have a pilot shredder, and echo medivh on those 2 are not bad. Those are like premium cards. It's like drawing 2 premium cards for 4 mana, which is not bad in itself. Or let's say low feb and a water elemental. That is totally fine to echo medivh if you don't have any other place. Getting another low feb is very nice. So Belcher, this one is a must, I think. It has Death Rattle, so it buffs the Undertaker, and it also like synergizes very well with Duplicate. What you do is you protect your smaller minions by playing this taunt, and he has to go through this guy first. So you get, if you duplicate the Belcher and get 2 new Belchers, you usually just win the game by then. You get a huge advantage anyway from that. And it is hard to deal with. Usually you want creatures that are hard to deal with in this deck, because that way you can utilize your echo medivh better. Sylvanas, this is one of the best 6 drops. It can just swing the game sometimes. If you're behind and you play it, you can just swing the game back to your favor if they don't have a silence. And it's also 6 mana is great for if you have 10 mana at your disposal. You're in late game, and then you can play Sylvanas and then echo medivh, so you get another Sylvanas. And let's say you have another minion, it's totally worth it to do it. You already have like a loot order maybe, and you play the Sylvanas, and then you echo medivh, you get another loot order and a Sylvanas. That's totally fine. This is my last guy we have, and there's one weakness to playing Dr. Boom, but it's that we have 1 BJ's target in our deck, and there's a lot of BJ's running around right now in the meta game. People even run 2 BJ's in a lot of decks, so it's a bit weaker to that. But since this guy can buff the Undertaker twice, I think this is just too good to not have, even though it has some weaknesses. And even if they BGH it, you can still clear the BGH with the bombs. So it's not too terrible like playing a Ragnaros and he just BGH it, and you get nothing from the Ragnaros, and he gets a 4/2 on the field. So I think it's fine to run 1. I used to have a lot bigger stuff as well in my first versions of the deck, like Ragnaros. Even I tried Antonidas as well, but I think this is fine. If you like this, go ahead and follow me on Twitter. My Twitter is, I can type it here, 1 second. This is my Twitter, coL.SjoW. Follow me on Twitter. You can see on the upper left corner. I will probably do more of these kind of deck techs in the future for other cool stuff. So if you like this, add me on Twitter and tell me. I might do more in the future. This version can still be upgraded, I think. This is not like, I change this deck every day, now and then, and I think we're on a good way to like perfect the list for the meta game. Yeah, thanks for watching everybody. Hope you liked it, and see you next time.